All right, all of you wonderful boys and girls, you wonderful human beings, welcome to Mission Critical Podcast. This is episode 46. If you are watching or listening to this podcast, you are the resistance. Bottom line, you are the resistance. All right, I'm one of your guests, Mark, over there. Oh, that camera always screws me up. Over there is our other host, Redbeard. Yeah, and then down below, our very special guest, been on a bunch of times, Monsignor Patrick. Patrick, just because you have been on, but maybe just give everybody a quick intro as to who you are before we get into the subject for tonight.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
We haven't done it in a while is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, well, just like to say welcome, everybody. Yeah, my name's Patrick. Have a long background. Started off in the Marine Corps back in the 80s, ended up going into law enforcement in the mid 90s. 9/11 happened, came back in on the mill side. So ended up at the agency working with Mark. Let's see, back in federal law enforcement. So yeah, just kind of a wide mix of stuff, but between military, law enforcement, and intel stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
I think that Venn diagram just looks like a circle almost between. I
mean, pretty much.
You know, it's not quite right, but bad analogy. But all right, Redbeard. So, or boys and girls, before we start this, we got our Mad Minute, and then, but before we do that, I just want to let you know what we're going to talk about here tonight, right? So, we're kind of wrapping up our conversation on the border tonight. I had a really good conversation with a gentleman who's been a guest on our show before, Chip, former FBI guy. I was talking to him over the weekend. And, and I apologize to everybody who watched our live stream on Friday. I unfortunately tried, at the very end of the live stream, I tried cramming that proverbial, 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag, because I have really wanted to talk about this subject from the perspectives that we're going to talk about tonight, yet we have not had a chance to do so in the past. So we're going to wrap up the border for now in this episode, and we're going to come at it from 4 perspectives, 4 arguments, if you want: humanitarian, economic, law enforcement at the national level, for the United States. I mean, every other country who's afflicted by this has their own law enforcement issues. And then again, the national security issues, again, from a very ethnocentric American perspective. That's where we're kind of coming from. There's many other countries out there in the world who are experiencing these same issues. And my kind of where we're going to frame this tonight is looking at it from those 4 perspectives to try to, figure out and just maybe to get some people thinking about what is the real cost of that. But before we go into that tonight, I got one little piece of housekeeping. I just mentioned the live stream. Excuse me. So going forward, Redbeard and I, we're trying to figure this out. And, we can live stream to a couple different platforms. But I think when we do that, there's a mechanism when we do it where only one of those platforms, the people watching on that one platform, are the only people who can leave comments and interact with us. So tomorrow night, Wednesday, the 14th of February, Redbeard and I are going to be, for about an hour, we're going to be doing a series of live stream tests. So if you're seeing this video during the day, because this should post by 1400 on Wednesday, but if you're seeing this on whatever your channel is, your platform, you're going to see us pop in and out just trying things. Hey, if you see us go live and you want to join in and say, hey, you guys are knuckleheads, join in. All the more the merrier. But we're going to be going through a few things, trying to figure out, because, it's one of those situations where you'll either find the answer on the internet immediately, or you'll be researching it for 2 more hours. So we're just going to do some tests, and we'll have the answer better than 2 hours of researching it, because I couldn't find the answer right out there in the open. So, all right, that was our little bit of housekeeping. Now let's get into our Mad Minutes, and then we're going to get into tonight's podcast. Again, we're going to do final conversations about the border. We're very lucky and honored to have Patrick with us tonight, because this is definitely in his wheelhouse on a multitude of levels. So again, we're going to look at the border from the humanitarian perspective, where the arguments, humanitarian arguments, economic arguments, law enforcement, crime, safety, if you want to call it that, and then that next tier of that, which is the national security side. So before we go into it, Redbeard, start us off on the Mad Minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep mine pretty short and sweet. Mark already heard my rant earlier. I'm just going to say what people don't want to admit, which is our particular government does more to create many, if not most, of all of its own enemies, radicalize their own enemies against us, and create insurgencies against us, and we fund those things as well. So realistically, we have to evaluate, like, oh, gee, I wonder why that is. Like, say, for instance, the IRS goes and wipes out your entire bank account, and then you sit there and wonder why people radically hate you now. Well, because you're a bunch of douchebags, and what you're doing is wrong, and you shouldn't do it. In that same realm can be applied to places around the world. Like, you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be doing. I'm not even going to get into the constitutional thing of it. And then you're like, oh no, like, people hate us, and it's like, really? Like, but you're the ones creating your own opposition at this point. So that's my passive aggressive argument about that.
Well, there's so much more to unpack behind the scenes.
Oh gosh, yeah.
But yeah. All right, Patrick, mad minute, sir.
Oh, geez. Okay. Hey, I'll keep it quick. Kind of feeding off of what Redbeard just went over. I mean, hey, I've worked in pretty much every level of the government that you can, from local all the way up to federal, from, small, active duty military to, working at the agency. So the one thing that always rings true whenever I think about all my experiences, and anybody who's honest with himself that's worked in different facets of the government, is that if it's government run, it's probably going to be screwed up. And you measure that by the fact to say, hey, if this was a business, a corporation, and we were making a profit, or we had to show actual results for the efforts, I think we would have been out of business a long time ago. So to the listener who's not maybe part of that or hasn't been around that stuff, I think the strong message to take away from a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast are just, hey, you got to take care of yourself, self-reliance, and taking care of your family, your neighbors, and that type of thing, and really building those bonds, because that's what America is. It's not the government, it's you.
100%.
Well, and then, so my mad minute is the you part. So the you is me. So I'm just going to take President Biden's, recent presser. We have the report basically saying that he can't be found culpable or guilty of mishandling classified documents because he's got a memory or mental issues. Well, okay. Well, but is that now he has mental issues, or was it back when he mishandled classified documents? And then this coward comes out there and throws his staff under the bus. And okay, well, then there's so many questions here. Well, if the staff was the one mishandling classified documents, did they even have appropriate clearance to even handle those documents? And more importantly, whether it was the staff or whether it was you, if the staff did it, somebody took that stuff out of a skiff. That was totally There are rules and procedures for this. And this is and I'm wrapping it up. I've had to go through multiple lifestyle polygraphs, in the agency. One of the times, one of my polys, I almost got in trouble. Again, I'm the ground force commander. I'm the ground branch guy. I've got people working underneath me. If they're misusing these resources, guess what? That responsibility is still ultimately mine, because I have overall control and I've got to maintain that. And that's the same with anyone. So it was just such a disgrace to see that press conference when he threw everybody else under the bus. And my final comment is, hey, if he's mentally unqualified, if he can't remember, if his memory, then why? Then it just begs so many questions. Okay, well, he did that when he was vice president, which he didn't have authorization to do. So was he mentally unstable back then or unqualified? Because if that's the case, then how did he make it up into the Democratic nominee? How is he the president? And how does that absolve him from, or the staff? People mishandled classified documents. And I'm here to tell you, if that would have been me, and I left as a GS-14. If that would have been me, it would have been best case scenario, losing my TSSCI and never being able to work in the intel community again. Most likely scenario, I would have been breaking, big rocks into small rocks, at least for a little period of time. So that's my mad minute. It's just utter disgrace. It's not two different forms of justice. There's one justice, and it doesn't apply. And I'm going to try to misquote Bongino here, or I'm going to misquote him. However he says it. It really is only one level of justice, and it's for those elites and those people in power. And if you're the political enemy or if you're the smellies, then whatever happens. You know, whether it's brown shirts, you know, the Stasi, concentration camps, gulags. That's what the rest of us get. But people like him, Hillary Clinton, they can break the rules all day long and not a friggin' thing happens. So actually, we didn't plan this. That kind of ties into what the other two gentlemen just said in a weird way, don't you think, guys?
I think so.
Boy, we got big trouble ahead of us.
Awesome.
All right. Well, on that, that's the Mad Minute. Went a little bit. I'm the guy who said, "Hey, come on, guys, let's keep it short." And I'm the one who went over a minute this time. So I apologize to everybody, especially Redbeard, who is seriously. I'm trying to bring him in. He could snap at any moment, boys and girls, for what's going on in his day today. I shouldn't pour gasoline on it or poke the bear or poke the beard.
I'm just gonna say that your example of the type of justice system is kind of what gives way to the very insurgents our government hates. And I'm not going to say anything more.
If you were evil, and being evil doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't necessarily equate to being stupid. But if you were evil, you would be working systems so exactly these type of things happen. So I get away, and I'm hoping, just like January 6th, I hope some of you people show up and do something stupid, because I'll be able to use that. It's a win-win, no matter how I play this game. And that's the environment we are in, unfortunately, at this point in time. So let's take that and let's turn it around to the border, right? And kind of wrap this up for tonight. So before I turn it over to Patrick and Redbeard, I just got to we might see this gentleman tonight. He's been on before. As I mentioned earlier, this is kind of all stemming from a conversation I had with him over the weekend. Chip, he is working right now. He might be able to join us, but he's spending time with his students and making sure he's doing the right thing mentorship wise, but he's going to try to get in here. But he did give me authorization to say this. So this conversation stemmed from, or where we're going tonight, it stemmed from a conversation I had with him over the weekend. And as we started talking about this, you know, it just kept coming to like, how far do we go? When is enough is enough? And then that kind of got me thinking, all right, well, let's break this down. And so we're going to do it from 4 perspectives: humanitarian, economics, law enforcement, and national security. So let's just start off with the humanitarian perspective here on where we're going. If you're going to sit and argue that it's the right thing to do, simply because it's the right thing to do, and we're America, we usually try to do the right thing. We used to try to be that beacon on the hill. So if you're going to try to do this, it's the right thing to do. I'll turn it over to Redbeard and Patrick just for, you know, their initial comments. And then you, the people watching and listening, ask yourself, well, where does that end? How far does that go? What does that mean? Well, it's the right thing. We should just do it. Is that just the end of the argument? And we just say we should just do it because we should just do it? Or are there other factors and other variables, even from the humanitarian perspective, that should be taken in consideration? Who wants to kind of chime in on that one first? Patrick or Redbeard?
Patrick can go if you would like.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about that. You're talking about the humanitarian side of things. And, you know, I think that anybody in their right mind, in a reasonable mind, would look at, you know, people that are fleeing a part of the world that, you know, they are truly oppressed and fighting for their lives, or running for their lives, or seeking shelter in the United States. I think that those people have a pretty strong case for asylum. I don't think anybody doubts that, right? Or if you got somebody that just is a teetotaler, I think that's kind of that's just wrong, in my opinion. But on the flip side to that, you've got people that now are basically gaming the system and just, you know, claim asylum, and our system has been watered down to say, oh, you said the word asylum, it's like a child's game. Yep, come on in, you're an asylum seeker. So that word gets out pretty quick in today's modern age, you know, and everybody, like, you know, running around making videos on YouTube and all the social media channels on how to get into the United States, what to say, what not to say. And it's just become a farce. So we're now not seeing, you know, families that are fleeing. We're starting to see a lot of, you know, probably like, you know, 20 to 50-year-old males, which, you know, we used to refer to in the military and agency as military age males coming into the country without a family. And you have to wonder what's the agenda here, what's going on. So all the word games that take place with our policies and how it's enforced, and I feel so sorry for the Border Patrol agents that are basically told to stand down and not or actually facilitate the illegal entry of these folks into the country when they took oaths to protect it. it's just horrible. So again, from the humanitarian side, how do we vet that? Now people that have a true need are amongst the numbers of people that aren't, that are here maybe to do harm at the behest of a nation state. And the cartels are driving it. So just sheer numbers, how can you screen that? It's just too much. It's just not practical. So
so just taking it back excuse me, just taking it back a quick step, because again, the first rung of this ladder, and this is a ladder, and the rungs aren't uniquely independent. Like you can go up, but to get to the top, you got to go through the other rungs. To get to the bottom, you got to go through the other rungs. Like these things all actually make a circle, if you want to make. That's kind of how I'm seeing it, from my perspective, in a logic stream argument. So if you're going to do the humanitarian thing, and as Patrick just kind of talked about, okay, well, where does it end? How many people get to come through? Where do they stay? Again, it just begs so many other questions. Well, where do we stop this? So in the recent madness of this bill that 20 some quote unquote Republicans decided to sell the country, plus all the Democrats, no one's asking that question. Okay, well, where does it end? Okay, how many people come through? And by allowing this and creating this flood, just so even right now, for everybody who thinks, and I really wish Kevin was here, because he admitted, he came out and he said, "Hey, I'm very liberal on our immigration policy." I really wanted him to be here because I not to pick a fight or get into an argument, but I think he could possibly do this. But most people haven't thought this through. To what end? At what cost? Where does it end? We might actually be, through our humanitarian efforts, might actually be causing humanitarian crisis. Look at all the drugs. Look at all the human trafficking. The child sex slave. All the stuff that's associated. The cartels are running the rat lines. Rat lines, just a term, back in the day, like of how to sneak into a place. Like you could call it a smuggler's route or things like that. Type of thing. But if we're just opening up the floodgates and everybody's rushing up here, well, how many people are trampled to death? I know I'm being facetious, but you see my point. What is the suffering, that they're going through along this journey? Yeah. Is Mexico doing anything to protect these people as they're coming to the border? Or to Patrick's point, are the cartels just taking advantage of everybody and, charging more money, or raping people, or abducting children and putting them into, child trafficking? And then more importantly, for everybody in America, oh, we want to be a sanctuary city. Everybody should come here. Well, I'm just going to throw this out there. Martha's Vineyard. So here's the humanitarian side of it. You wanted this, I can't speak obviously for everyone from Martha's Vineyard, but look at Chicago, look at New York, look at Cali. Oh, this is what we need to do. But when it's at your doorstep, you're suddenly like, oh, no, not us. Just think of Martha's Vineyard. How long do you guys even remember that? How long did those illegal immigrants actually stay? Was it didn't they get kicked out within 48 hours?
Yeah, I was just about to say 48 hours.
Like that.
Yeah. And Mark, to your point too, at last conservative estimate that DHS put out, we're looking at least from last summer till now, 11 million people have come into the country. I don't know what this, where all of the listeners are located, but just imagine an influx of 11 million people. This is not like just some kind of, small, grassroots thing that, oh, here's a little bit here, a little bit there. We got some NGOs helping them out. They could stay at the church, and then we'll kind of integrate them into the society. 11 million people from all over the planet. It's not, the idea that it's, these are poor Mexican, families that are coming here for work. That is wrong. That is just wrong. So what is happening with that? And again, I feel sorry for the people that actually do want to come here for humanitarian purposes, because they are seeking those things, but they're being way outnumbered right now.
Well, and so there you go. So humanitarian, and it implies, good versus evil, right? Doing the right thing. Well, to Patrick's point, you've got a POE 200 yards away where people are actually trying to process into the United States using the correct, again, we have a process. Whether the process sucks or whatever, okay, that's a separate conversation. Maybe we should focus our efforts on fixing our immigration policy of how we grant asylum and how we grant people, different types of visas and green cards, X, Y, and Z. But that's not what is happening. So what about those people who are trying to do it the right way? Think about that from a humanitarian perspective. what does that, what would that say to you if you've been standing in line, you know, metaphorically for like, you know, 3 months trying to go through this process, and then somebody else just cuts in the line in front of you and just crosses illegally right over there, and then suddenly is getting $1,000 debit cards, you know, out of New York. I'm kind of segueing us into the economic side, but how would it, is that the humanitarian? Like, we just told somebody else who's trying to do things the proper way to piss off.
Yep.
Thoughts, Redbeard, Patrick? Kind of wrapping up the humanitarian side of it, but how is that humanitarian?
So here's a perspective that I don't remember if we talked about, but it's something that, you know, I know is a touchy subject, especially for a lot of the very like globalist type people and the people that love like absurd amounts of government. But, you know, the United States, whether people want to admit it or not, are also very good at creating the conditions for humanitarian crisis in other countries. And so we very much, you know, we drive those conditions, whether it's South America, whether it's in a place like Ukraine, whether it's in a place like the Middle East, or any areas of interest that we have. I mean, look at the amount of regime change we've had. Now, to Patrick's point, you know, if we're driving a bunch of this stuff and we are meddling in different countries' affairs and we're causing regime change, there are truly affected people that, you know, they have to get out of there. It's terrible conditions. I think each and every one of us can empathize to those people's plight. And yeah, we want to help those people. But as both of these guys have mentioned, I mean, if you piss in somebody's Wheaties, they're probably not going to like it very much, and you're bound to have people that will mix in with the truly affected people from those places and want to do not great things. And so like there should be a sense of empathy in humanity, you know, humanity. But I think a lot of what we can do to mitigate a lot of these different crises is also take a look at our foreign policy outside of the obvious things that these guys have mentioned. Because if our foreign policy is to be seen as how it's been for decades now, which is being involved in places we don't need to be, and we're stirring up humanitarian crisis, I mean, we're also very much a driver of our own problems. I kind of diatribed about that in the very beginning. Like we create our own enemies at this point. So we also create our own humanitarian, you know, hordes that come to our border. And, you know, and how could you not see it from their perspective to some degree for the affected people, to where it's just like, well, you destroyed our country, so now you're responsible for us. And so there's a lot of things that factor into that, but that's one area that I think, you know, you can't have this conversation pertaining to humanitarian issues without at least bringing that up. And so that's kind of all I have for that. But it seems like a touchy subject for some people, and I've never understood why. Because that's in the same light as, you know, we shouldn't be starting wars. It's a very you know, it's along the same lines as anti-war stuff, you know, which I think all of us can agree, like, not being involved in wars is important. And this is no exception. You know, if we're doing all this stuff around, you know, especially in South America, unfortunately, where we've dictated a lot of regime change, I mean, this is part of that causation and effect, right? So I'm going to leave it at that, but that is one area that I felt very much I had to bring up on this conversation before we segue into economic, because that does by way factor into economic as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to use a brief analogy, or it's actually not an analogy, but there's a viral video out there. I already kind of talked to Patrick about it a little bit, and I'm kind of trying to set you up, Patrick, to see if you've got any comments here for the podcast. But it's a man, you know, it's a clear gotcha type of, you know, man on the street type of video. Some guy must have been driving through a neighborhood. He sees an individual, you know, in front of his yard, you know, house. He's watering his yard. He's got a Biden 2020 t-shirt on. The man approaches him, you know, he's recording this, and he starts talking about immigration policy And the guy with the Biden shirt is just going on about, yeah, we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. And yeah, we should let them in. And now, I don't know who the other gentlemen are, that the guy with the camera, whether they're friends of his or whatever, but then he's like, oh, okay, perfect. And then he whistles. And then from around the corner come 3 Hispanic gentlemen. I don't know what their actual ethnicity is, but they're clearly Hispanic. And they're speaking Spanish as they're walking by the guy with the garden hose and the guy with the camera and the guys, the 3, Hispanic guys, quote unquote, the actors. They're all saying thanks, and then the guy with the hose is looking around and his eyes start. And it's like, what? And it's like, well, you said you would be willing to do this. Well, that's really awesome. We really appreciate your humanitarian effort. And then that guy's like, whoa, no, I didn't mean my house. Again, same thing with like Martha's Vineyard, right? So on that. And why do you think that guy said it? That guy probably at that moment realized, hey, there's going to be a financial burden here. I don't know who these dudes are. There might be a physical security issue here. And because I don't know who this, and I'm sure the property owner didn't think this way, but because we don't know who these people are, there is indeed a larger national security issue here. But if you haven't seen it, the clip's out there, go find it. But Patrick, when I told you about that, you laughed. So I'm going to give you last comments on the humanitarian as we kind of like roll it into the economic with that right there.
All right. Yeah. So as far as the humanitarian stuff goes, I mean, that's how a lot of the sanctuary cities got started, is that was their idea in mind. And like, hey, we welcome all, we're, truly American approach. And, it sounds good on paper. It sounds good politically. In reality and practice, when those things actually occur, not so much. So that's kind of, what that video was, showing on the gentleman watering his lawn. So, but now, that's one guy, but you've got entire cities and entire staffs of employees and states even saying, yeah, we'll take all these folks in. You remember the governor of New York coming out and saying, yeah, we will welcome all these folks. And then that quickly changed, to now like, oh, you got to go somewhere else. Now, because now it's real. Now it's here. So, you said something, it's the old saying, you wrote a check that your mouth wrote a check that your ass couldn't cash. And now that it's there to roost and it's reality and it's in your face and it's a political nightmare, whoa, now it needs to go away. But it's not going away. They're just going to keep coming. And that's because there's a massive disconnect between the states and the federal government, and definitely cities and federal government. So there's some, is it incompetence? Is it an agenda? But, long story short, the humanitarian crisis that's arisen from this is just catastrophic. Human trafficking for illegal labor, for sex trafficking. This is just run rampant. The cartels are running this. And you know what? When you don't have a border and you don't enforce the laws that are on the books, well, you just kind of asked for that. It'd be like, I don't know if you guys, you leave your doors open and maybe put a sign out in the yard saying, hey, the house is unsecured because we welcome everybody. Okay, well, when your TV's gone, your car's stolen, your food's out of your refrigerator, I mean, you can't cry, right? That's what you did.
So we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit into like, just the realm of like, the criminal element, and you could, take that criminal element at that, local level, but, what are terrorists? What are, evil, Adolf Hitler's? Well, they're criminals as well. It's that same kind of psyche and that same mindset. So whether at that local level, Patrick, or even at that higher level, I mean, what did you expect to happen? If you're just going to allow, 1,000 people coming through, do you think exactly 1,000 are going to be Mother Teresa's? No, there's going to be evil people in there. And if you're not taking action, so we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I like where you're going. So let me just do this real quickly as we kind of go into the economic side. I've got 2 things on the economic side I want to share with everybody. Here's the first thing. So, again, maybe I should have done this at the very beginning. I apologize. I'm still getting better at figuring out. And look, I've got a real business to run too. So it's not like I had all day long to get this all like, perfectly arranged and everything. So just give me a second here. I'm going to share something with everybody. All right. And let me see over here just real quickly. Okay. And now let me come here. All right. So I should have probably played this at the beginning, but so maybe the first question is, the border is secure, right? I mean, look, they've told us, guys.
Is closed. The border is secure. The border is secure. The border is closed, the border is secure, and the border is not open.
We have a secure border.
I can tell you the border is secure.
By what measure is it secure now, sir?
So there is not a common definition.
The president has done more.
I love the last part. There's not a common definition of what secure means. Patrick, I just got to come to you on this one. Let me just get this out of here real quickly. You know, before we get into the economics, I'm sorry, sir, from your very honored and you know, illustrious background, did you ever have a problem with the definition of what secure means? I'm just kind of curious. What are your thoughts, sir?
Not really. I mean, I'm trying to imagine how that would have played out, you know, when I was in Paris Island those years ago. You know, hey, recruit, how come your weapon's not secure? Well, you know, drill instructor, it defines secure. You know, how would that play? That's probably not going to play out too well for me. But yeah, it's laughable. This is embarrassing. You know, Secretary Mayorkas needs to go. I mean, this is irreparable damage to the country by allowing this to happen. And this is not going to go away. This is going to impact generations of people. And what happens?
On that note, so how is this humanitarian? If this is going to have a deleterious effect, a negative effect on future generations of Americans, both economically, physical security, you know, and the whole litany of issues, how is this the humanitarian thing to do? And Redbeard, I'm going to turn that over to you real quickly, because I don't know if you were laughing behind your hand. Like, so when I had Patrick full screen, I can still see you. And I didn't know if you were laughing, if you were just like if you were just trying to bite down to, like, you know, so you didn't scream out in anger. I don't know.
To be honest, my brain just hurts some days, Mark. I'm just going to use an analogy. I think I've used, I've brought it up to you before, but think of it this way, as it pertains to like the realm of security, right? Like, we have some of the nicest places in the world that have some of the best security in money can buy, right? You know, and as we're talking about the border, we also have to remember that to some degree, our property has some type of a defined line. I think we can all agree on that. Yeah.
Yep.
That's how it's supposed to work. Last time I checked.
So I mean, so if our property it has defined lines as to where it begins and where it ends, you could put me into the most prime inhabitable neighborhood possible. I'm still that guy that's probably going to more than likely lock my door. And if I have a storm door and then my primary door, I'll lock both of those. Whether I'm, you know, home, like even if I'm home, like there's a lot of times to where like it still makes sense, right? Because if it's not the area that I'm going in or out from, why would I have it less secure? And so when you think about this, even if we lived in a perfect world, where we didn't have as much strife, when we didn't have as much humanitarian crisis or anything like that, it still wouldn't give way to an excuse of having a more porous, lenient, less secure border. And when you think about the definition of security, there's different levels, obviously, of security, but you're securing something, you're protecting something, right? Like that's what security does, is you offer some level of protection. So if we don't allow that, you know, I mean, I guess you're kind of dumb if you don't have that established in your own home. Why would you expect that to be anything less in good or bad circumstances for the border? It makes zero sense. And again, I can empathize with the humanitarian thing, because we all want to have, we want to help. And I think in the economic aspect, we consider that too, but it just, whether it's security or humanitarian outlook, look, I mean, there's very definable practical things out there that we know they're set in stone. So if the city is going to tell us where our property lines are, and mind you, they can define what a property line is, i.e. a border, right? Our cities are very good at that. So if they can do that, why can't they do that for our border?
And you hit a great point. What's practical? They do a great job of that, because they're going to make sure they get their property tax out of you. They're going to zone you.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So if they can do that to extort us for taxes, why can't they do it for the border?
That's exactly what I was going to say. The bureaucrats, they're going to make sure they get every penny out of you based on borders. Patrick, did you have a comment? Otherwise, I'm going to play something here.
Yeah, real quick to go off of what Redbeard was saying. So we just had the Super Bowl, and every year there's a number of events across the country that DHS and FEMA deem as NSSCs, or National Special Security Events. And when they deem those events to be that, they bring in large amounts of federal agencies and that type of thing to watch after it. Oversight, there's pre-event scans, all kinds of eyes are on what's going on in the crowd and who's coming in and what's happening as it occurs, and then even the afterwards when people are exiting the event, right, like the Super Bowl. So just think, we just had all of that happened, and I didn't see any any migrant issues or anything like that in Las Vegas. Why can't we do that with our own border?
Yeah.
Well, so again, and I apologize to the viewers and listeners. Again, I'll get better at this. Hopefully carve out a little bit more time in my day to get this set up a little bit more. But I probably should have started with that clip of because there's a ton of those clips out there, those mashups. The border's secure, the border's secure. But to your point, Patrick, well, and then so and then again, today is the 13th of February, Tuesday. Excuse me. So the argument over the last week is, take what Patrick just said, but now ask yourself this from the political argument that's going on. Well, which one is it? Because on one hand, and I could have done a mashup. You go do it yourself. It's all over the internet and on Twitter and everything. I can play mashups of all these, and we just did. The border's secure. The border's secure. But now just think of what's been happening, what's been spoken in the last week, with this crazy bill where they're trying to, spend billions of more dollars, in Ukraine, under the auspices of like, well, this is what we need to secure our border. Well, which one is it? You just told me the border was secure, but now you're saying that the border's not secure and there's nothing I can do about it. But we can all look to 18 USC and all these different, laws and executive, authorizations where you have the ability to shut the border down right now. Like everybody pissed and moaned about Trump, on the quote unquote travel bans. That is the president. That is within the president's, the legitimate exercise of their actual duties, right? Of their what's the word I'm looking for, Patrick? Come on, give me a more military term. Like they're acting definitely within the realm
of their scope of authority.
Yeah, there it is. Scope of authorities. Thank you, sir. Yeah. So which one is it? Are you operating within the scope of your authorities? Or is it secure? Is it unsecure? Like right now, they're trying to blame the Republicans. Well, the border's not secure because of Republicans. Hang on. You guys have been saying the border's secure for the last 3 years. Which one is it? And I apologize. I probably should have started off with that as a great segue into then looking at the humanitarian, the economic, the law enforcement, and the national security. But I don't think it's too late, and I'm glad you guys brought it up. And it goes into, and I'm just going to play one quick thing here as I kind of segue. So again, humanitarian. From the humanitarian perspective, when is enough enough? At what point do you just simply, okay, well, now it's enough, right? Because you can't sit and talk about the humanitarian aspect without starting to talk about what we're just saying right here. Hey, I've got to provide ID when I go and, and buy tobacco or alcohol. Why don't I have to provide ID when I vote? Or why don't I have to provide ID or why don't I have to follow the already established laws that are already on the books that you don't need any special authorization or any Congress, the House or the Senate to pass any new law. The laws are already there that give you the authorization, the scope of authority to actually stop this right now. But now you're saying it's the Republicans. Okay, which one is it? So again, for everybody watching and listening, go do your own research, but clearly it can't be both. It's one or the other. Either the border's secure or the Republicans are the ones who've made it insecure. And there's so many Republicans who aren't really Republicans. That could be actually true. And then that kind of goes into what Patrick is saying, what is practical. But now before I go this, and I'm going to kind of bring us into the economic side here, I'm going to just share the screen real quickly with one thing. So here, if you don't think about the humanitarian aspect, oh, we're just going to do this, we'll just let everybody come across. Okay, well, you're eventually going to get to where this moment right here. You're going to eventually get to this, where you've got a mayor in a major U.S. city saying the following right here, guys.
Here's the Denver mayor saying we're going to cut city programs to the children and others for the illegal aliens.
Thank you all so much for being here this morning. I'm here to talk a little bit about the devastating impact of the failure of Republican leadership in Congress this week to pass comprehensive immigration change, and the impact that will have on both city budgets and on services that we can provide for newcomers in the city. The second is we will start to have to greenlight a set of hard decisions about budget reductions across the city to meet those costs that we know will continue to arrive. We want to talk about two of those today. While they're the first steps, they unfortunately will not be the last and may not be the hardest. This is a plan for shared sacrifice. And so in terms of our first step on city cuts, we are announcing today we will make some changes both to our services at DMV and to our services on Parks and Rec.
So right there, I mean, and I want to point out something I missed the first time I actually, let me remove this from the stage. When I heard that the first time, I just caught it this last time. Do you notice how he said shared sacrifice? So that kind of appeals to that humanitarian side of it. But listen to what he just said. He's basically saying that you, the taxpayer of Denver, you know, the citizen of Denver, you're not going to get the services that your tax dollars are supposed to provide because it's now a shared sacrifice. Okay, maybe he's making an appeal to your humanitarian side, but at what point is this? Did you volunteer for the shared sacrifice? A sacrifice usually means a voluntary action. I mean, I'm going to turn this over to Patrick on that. I think you know where I'm going. I see Redbeard nodding too. All right, let's go to Patrick, and then I'll bring it to you, Redbeard, on that. And then we'll kind of. I don't even know if we need to dive into the economics. I've got one other thing to share in that, but come on, it's obvious we can't afford this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about economics too, but not just that. And the sad thing is that they try to spin this into a political thing, and by pointing at the other party. When you're the one taking the action, right? You're the one that has the authority to make that happen and push that city council to do that, right? Did they take a vote on that? Did the citizens of Denver come together with a special vote to see what they wanted to do with this? I don't know. I don't live there. I would doubt it, but who knows, right? Without that, somebody's making an arbitrary decision on how tax revenue is going to be utilized. And I don't see how this individual ran, on that when he took office, right? That wasn't around. So it's frustrating. You think about the cost to the city as far as, what it's going to be, not just to house and feed these people, but also what about if these people have to go to the hospital? Who's going to pay those bills? When they're school-age children, most states have a law that, hey, if you're, 5 or 6 years old, you have to be in a school program. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to inundate the school system with a bunch of kids. Who's paying for that? Are those school districts funded? That means taxes have to go up. There's just no way around it. So to point the fingers, this is a party thing, and it's disgusting.
But and I'm sorry I just didn't want to get too far away from it, or just go to that video clip. That's the mayor basically saying, I'm just going to start reducing services in other areas. So again, at some point, you're going to come up against, the wall. There is a point where okay, this you may argue from a humanitarian perspective, we need to do this. But if you don't have a solution for how you're going to pay for it, and then the second and third order effects that video points out, and what Patrick just pointed out, well, then you're not actually in a serious conversation, right? You're probably dealing with somebody who's just speaking emotionally, and that's great. We can sit and speak emotionally about who won the Super Bowl and whether, blah, and all other kinds of issues, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the reality that's going to impact all of us on our day-to-day lives. And that's one right there for the poor citizens of Denver. Was there ever a DMV that actually operated, you already know, everybody knows what I'm saying. So you're going to make the DMV worse than it already is? What the F, man? Hey, Redbeard, before I bring it over to you, I just got to throw one more thing economically in, and then we'll come to you. And honestly, I don't think we need to go much on economics, because everybody should get this. If you balance your own checkbook, if you're concerned about how you're paying your mortgage or your rent and putting milk in your refrigerator and gas in your economics, man, it's basic math, man. If I only have $1,000 a month, I'm spending $1,500. How does that work? But before we do that, I got one more thing on this, because this is me, and we're all individuals. We all have our own selfish motivations. I spent almost 30 years of my life in the service of this country. I don't have private insurance. I have the VA because I earned that. I spent 23 years, like 22 technically, well, 23 technically, 22 on the books. And the VA healthcare, I've earned that. And then, so I just want to share one thing because, okay, well, but if for humanitarian reasons, we're going to start doing these other things. And then according to the mayor of Denver, it's got to be a series of shared sacrifices. To Patrick's point, was there a referendum? Did people get to vote on it? Or were unelected bureaucrats just suddenly making up, doing their own thing? And this is what I'm going to point out here, is exactly that. So yeah, right here. This is a real thing. And I'm sure some of you who are veterans or who have veterans in your family, you've heard about this already. The VA is spending money that is set aside for the men and women who raised their right hands and volunteered to put their marriages were going to be ruined, their lives were going to be turned upside down. That's the reality of the military, right? I mean, not to go on a tangent, Patrick may agree or disagree. Being in the infantry, that's a single man's job. That's not a job for an old married guy, right? Maybe you get to that point and you move to battalion or something like that but being in the infantry and being in those combat arms, it's already tough enough as it is. And it really takes the toll on your family. And if you have kids or a wife or a husband, whatever it is, it really freaking sucks. And then to see this, here, I'll bring it full screen over. I got to jump back into this other side, but in case you just can't see it, look, this is already happening. So our limited resources, the limited resources that we as a nation have decided, because we did make this decision. We said, hey, we've got to take care of our veterans, the men and women who volunteer to serve our country and defend our country. We got to take care of them. And that is the contract, the compact that when I raised my hand, my right hand, and swore that oath, I did it knowing that somebody was going to take care of me. If I was killed or injured, the country, my fellow citizens, my brothers and sisters would take care of me. Now, unelected bureaucrats and just or elected ones like that, mayor from Denver are basically saying, yeah, we're not going to use the money for that anymore. Now we're going to give it to people who the first act of entering this country was to break our laws. So anybody want to jump in on that? But that's my economic argument right there. Because that is, again, going to Martha's Vineyard. Why do you think they kicked them out? Because they didn't want to have that was going to, on an economic basis, and then from a hubris, we don't want these dirty, smelly people living out here, and this is where all the wealthy, rich elite come to, But whether you condemn them or not, but they did their own economic calculus, and they said, yeah, that does not outweigh my, my virtue signaling humanitarian, argument. Anybody want to jump on that? And then we're going to move into law enforcement. Well, actually, both of you guys. Who wants to go first?
I'll just
right.
add something here real quick. One, I would argue in terms of being able to help people that the voluntarist approach typically tends to be somewhat better, albeit, I get that some organizations are, perhaps not as well funded as others, but you typically tend to find people with a little bit more compassion, a little bit more investment. They actually care for their fellow human being as opposed to an overgrown, bloviated government apparatus that requires 16 different signatures just so a guy can get a Band-Aid for his leg that he scraped on the side of the corner of a building or something like that, and we see a lot of very voluntary organizations that do a lot of help with homeless people. And the irony is, you would think that the government would, be all for something like this because it takes no resources from them. They can allocate their resources other ways. But what you end up having is there's almost this weird jealousy that stems from it, to where if the government's not doing it, they're not taking credit for it. So they get very jealous about somebody else doing something good in place of their absolutely bloated, ridiculous government apparatus way of doing things, which makes things 15 times harder than it has to be. Now, that being said, when you look at the language, and Mark knows I'm a big person on language, and Stephen, somebody who's been on here before, is also very big on that. When you listen to how people phrase things, and this mayor was saying like, oh, well, this is a shared responsibility. Okay, well, what can that imply? Well, that also implies like, well, this is a shared responsibility that you had no part in, and we're not telling you that this is what it's going to be, but we're basically extorting you, telling you you don't have a choice. And and I wouldn't be shocked that if somebody was to say no to this, that there wouldn't be ramifications for a person's business or something like that. Like, hey, if something happens to your business, we, the city of Denver, we don't really have an interest in you anymore because you're not going to follow suit with our bloated government apparatus. So there's a certain level of extortion that takes place, not only at an economic level, but from a rights and liberty based level. When you're just going to throw caution to the wind, especially when it deals with money and property and stuff like that, what you get is not a furtherance of economic stability or even in the humanitarian stability, but you get a complete breakdown of any real aid, any real function, any real potential to properly allocate resources, because you're not doing it in the way that it should be done, and it just makes a massive mess wherever you go. It's one of those things to where you have stupidity that begets stupidity. And I don't necessarily think that it's just whimsical stupidity. I think it's in many ways willful stupidity. And then by the time you realize what's wrong, it's gotten to a point that's so massive and heaping that you don't really know how to stop that ball from rolling down the proverbial hill. I'm always going to advocate on just a final note. I am going to advocate, like, look, if there are organizations out there that are private organizations, they're voluntary organizations, I would sooner send somebody who's looking for legitimate, like, economic aid, or humanitarian aid rather, that come into this country and they're looking for help. Like, those are the people to go to. Don't, like, yeah, the government's going to give you a lot of free stuff, but you are a subject, and you need to understand that you left one tyrant for another.
Patrick.
Yeah, the small business thing is real, so that's definitely going to have an impact on those folks. And to me, that's the backbone of America. I mean, really,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what people are brought up to believe. Hey, that's part of the American dream. You can start your own business and you can make something out of yourself, no matter what your circumstances are in life. On the military side, we literally just came out of 20 plus years of war. And you've got people that have seen some of the worst, situations and in human history that have taken place with the enemies that we're fighting, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the general areas around those two. You're now telling those people that, you know what, hey, you're going to have to take a knee here and wait, because we've got this crisis, and these people, like Mark said, broke the law coming into the country, and we're not quite really sure who they are or why they're coming here. You, the veteran who put your life on the line, it has to take a back seat to them for a while, so we can take care of this issue. That to me is the most disgusting thing a government can do. You've got people. I mean, I lost friends. I know Mark lost friends. Anybody in the military, lost people or was around that loss and the sacrifice. So I'm not talking about sacrificing some tax dollars by some bureaucrat. I'm talking about somebody who laid down their life because they wanted to protect their brothers and sisters. This is wrong. I'd love to know, who's pushing this agenda and thinks this is a good idea, because that to me that's grounds for not only dismissal, but that's grounds for uprising. This whole thing with the taxes, this Denver mayor standing up, oh, well, we're gonna reallocate your taxes. Our country was founded on less than this, folks. Taxation without representation. What is the thought process here? And I think the question that keeps creeping up in a lot of these things is what is too far? What's your breaking point? If I show up at at a VA appointment or something to do with service, and I'm told, yeah, hey, have a seat. We've got to deal with these folks that are living in tents. That's my line. So that's where I go to jail. That's where things go off the rails. That's not going to happen. And guess what? I'm not going after the migrants. So this is just it's reprehensible. And all these people, if they had a shred of dignity or honor about them, they would start a clock and end it and let somebody else take their place. But they don't.
Hang on, just real quickly, Redbeard. I'm going to turn it over to you, but I have to explain your body, your reactions and mine. Like, I could see you as Patrick was talking and I thought you were about to have an aneurysm. I saw like a vein on this side of your head, just like become the size of a fire hose. And I'm trying not to laugh, because Patrick's saying some serious stuff, but then the last thing he said, Patrick, brings it back down to reality, which is like, where is the shame? And as we're entering into the law enforcement side of it, I also think there's a question of legality here. Like, look, if I'm a law enforcement officer and I knowingly observe and allow and by not interfering or interdicting, am I not aiding and abetting? Like, so if you've got, local, state and federal law enforcement entities facilitating the trafficking of illegal aliens, and look, and I don't care what anybody wants to call them. Look, these are our legal terms. These are legal terms. They're human beings. Of course they are, you freaking retard. I know they are. But the alien means somebody outside of your country and they've entered this country illegal. I'm not going to buy the undocumented. No, again, that's just evil trying to twist our language so we don't call it what it really is. The moment we can't have a language, then how do we describe anything?
Yeah, Mark. Hey, one thing I say to your point is, like, if we cannot call evil or bad guys, we can't call them that. We're acquiescing and just allowing stuff to happen. I think that's a big push for these folks. Yeah. They don't want to take any action. They just want to let things happen and see where what happens. Let the chips fall where they may, and it's not going to end well.
Well, it goes all the way back full circle to, again, I look at it as this, it's a ladder, but all of the rungs are interconnected. You can't get to one without the other, no matter which direction you're going. They all support each other. So to your point, you can call it whatever you want, but to me, that's just, it just shows your intentionality. You're trying to muddy the waters for, nefarious reasons. And if you're not willing to use the language of our legal system, the language of our spoken language, if you're going to twist it and try to distort it, well, then you're a shady character. I'm already kind of like, okay, well, now I don't really know if I trust what you're saying. So for me anyway, you're losing me. You may have swayed me with your argument, but I see through your I'm going to use Loki, right? And I don't mean it from the Marvel sense of it. I mean it from the Nordic sense of it. Loki was the trickster, right? Loki was perfect at this stuff. Loki was evil of the gods, right? But then kind of going back to your point then, Patrick. So if you're going to sit and make a humanitarian argument to me, but then you're going to twist the words around and you're going to like, well then hang on. Then it's like calling everybody a racist. Well, then how do we even know who's really racist anymore? So there's two sides of that scale. Most people just ignore that shit because we know that a certain, political side is just going to call everybody racist. The people they don't agree with, either you're supporting, Putin or you're racist, or misogynistic. It's really, and I think that goes into the, again, that second and third order effects that no one's talking about. We are doing more damage in the long run just by even that right there, by our language and how we're approaching this subject. Did I add to what you said there, Patrick? I mean, you kind of got me going, absolutely. But I'm also, again, look at Redbeard laughing. I'm serious. Redbeard's, he was about to have an aneurysm. So I should shut up and let Redbeard kind of.
I'm just going to hit one point, and Patrick, I can't resist because Patrick was like, yeah, like this is how you get an uprising. And I'm going to beat this horse to death. I'm going to put it on a spit and I'm going to cook the thing and then eat it. And you'll hear me start to use this probably from here on out. But like, it's really weird how Patrick even came around to the point that I made earlier. Like, it's like our government has a knack for creating its opponent or opposing insurgencies, right? Like, it's this causation and effect to where it's like, oh, wow, like you're just screwing over your constituents, or you're doing this to somewhere else, or you're doing this to this country or this people or whatever. And it's just like, and then it's like they wake up one day and they're just like, I don't understand why there's a bunch of angry people with torches and pitchforks outside of my door. Like, this is terrifying. It's like, well, did you not stop to think as to why this might be happening? And did you not stop to evaluate, like, oh, these insurgencies are terrible. Why are they terrible? Like, have you actually stopped to examine the potential cause as to why they exist to begin with, because I just had to laugh. It's like we can't even have a conversation at this point without like it coming back around to that theme, right? Like it's like, yeah, like we're getting to a point though to where that's going to be very real, and you might not see it so much in the larger cities, but I'm here to tell you, like a lot more rural states, a lot more states like Texas and Wyoming and Montana and many other places, like, dude, there's still a huge bastion of Americans in this country that, they're probably going to get to a point to where they're just like, no, I don't even want anybody else in this county. And if you come into our county, then we'll deal with you accordingly. Like, that's not to paint those people as bad, but it gets to a certain point to where Patrick's not wrong. Like, their history has proven that people will only take so much before they take matters into their own hands, because their governments have become defunct of their responsibilities that we, the people, have allocated to them to properly discharge proper government authority and justice. And it's like, dude, like this.
So hang on,
we see this all the time.
Yeah, I just don't want you to go too far in that, because there's a couple great points there, and I want to kind of bring it down to Patrick, because he's kind of our resident subject matter expert on this. So Redbeard, I'm listening to you talk, and again making with all the jokes about you having an aneurysm aside, but like I know where you're coming from, and some of the notes I'd already written down as you guys were talking, it begs this question, it's a two-part question, so and I don't want to rabbit hole this, but if you were evil, wouldn't you have a plan that your plan is going to be, no matter what happens, it's win-win? So to your point, and we're already seeing it happen, there are people who are starting to get fed up with this. Look on the pedophilia side, or child grooming. There was a guy in Texas a week ago who was sick of the law enforcement not doing anything, and then he entrapped the guy and shot him. In a private conversation. Look, where I grew up, Grand Marais, Minnesota, this exactly happened. There was a guy who was stalking, a crazy guy was stalking somebody's child. And I was really trying to get the sheriff from where I grew up to come on tonight. He can't make it tonight. Maybe we'll get him on a later time. And I want him to come on because, well, for this point I was about to make, but also because, Cook County borders the Canadian border. And there's now a lot of, illegal immigration coming from north to south as well. So, but in Cook County, a gentleman, to Redbeard's point, maybe kind of bringing it all the way down to Patrick, but look it up. He had complained to the police. This guy was stalking his child, was definitely trying to, was going to, abduct his kid, and no one was listening to him, and no one was taking any action. And to Redbeard's point, and I'm not justifying it, but the guy confronted the potential rapist, child molester, ended up killing him in a very gruesome way. Well, or maybe a very, northern Minnesota kind of way, but killed him with a moose antler. I'm not even making that up. I mean, look it up. But then went and turned himself into law enforcement, with blood on him and everything, saying, yeah, I just killed the guy that you guys wouldn't do anything about. So it's an unfortunate, but so maybe just doing it from a law enforcement perspective, bringing it back to Patrick. But at some point in time, this is going to start happening, and it already is starting to happen. And it's not a good thing. That's not how a civilized, that's not how we should be operating, right? Patrick, do you want to chime in on that from a couple different angles? I mean, Redbeard, absolutely. No offense to Redbeard, but I'm trying to calm him down a little bit. He is going to bust a gasket here tonight. I can tell already. All right, Patrick.
Yeah. Hey, I kind of think that this feels like a culmination of a lot of the podcasts we've had before. But if you take a look at all the issues that we're talking about tonight, you just mentioned law enforcement. Before this crisis, if we were going to call it that, took place, they were already setting the stage to attack law enforcement. A bunch of the social, justice movements, all these things to make the police seem like bad guys, right?
Defund the police and
defund the police, right? Yeah. All of that stuff. It set the stage right there. Whatever, you think of law enforcement is a stabilization force in the country. It's like, we're going to try to keep, bad people from doing things because there's a there's people out there that are going to take away your freedom if you do a deterrence, right? They're a deterrent factor. When you start, demonizing them, that just opens the doors for more rampant criminal activity to take place. Now, with the border, you add in, to the country, like I said, conservative estimate of 11 million people into the mix, who come from all over the planet, and some with really, really bad intentions. Okay, now you've got that going on. And then around the same time, you're starting to take your veteran population that just fought 20 years of war, and you're marginalizing them by taking away benefits to assist illegal migrants. What is the message that sends to the next generation? Hey, I really want to sign up for the Army or the Marine Corps. So I can maybe have nothing at the end of it. Okay, if I get hurt or whatever. All of this is bad. And I think all this comes back to, I think the main purpose of this podcast is to educate folks and say, hey, look, if you're waiting on the government and law enforcement to help you, you're going to be waiting a long time. You have to seek self-sufficiency. You have to train. You have to, and I say train, and it's a holistic thing of, not just going to a range and shooting firearms, but also, being able to use your hands, being able to survive 72 hours if the power grid goes down, being able to source food, outside of a grocery store, hunt, plant your own food, that type of thing. But then also just be cognizant that, just like they say, hey, like the guy in the video, I don't want these people in my house. That was just an idea. That's for everybody else. Well, you know what? What happens when some of these things start to encroach on our lives? 11 million people and growing, that probability gets higher and higher and higher every day. And again, I don't want to jump on the fear mongering or, scare everybody, but look, folks, it's just a reality that you have to be prepared. And if you're not, you're putting your head in the sand and saying, okay, well, I hope it doesn't happen to me. And, just like you're the other version of the guy saying, well, yeah, somebody else needs to take these folks in, or, you know what you should do. I hate people that lead off with phrases like that. I think most people do. I don't like to be told that. So that's literally what these bureaucracies are doing, and the people that buy into this.
Hey, I kind of want to drive it into our next section, but I want to kind of address I'm just going to do it bullet statement, because again, we could sit and have a 4-hour long podcast. We could have multiple podcasts, but on the law enforcement side, especially based on some of the things Patrick just said, and, you can, I don't know if you guys can see me writing notes at times, but we've got this, the militarization or the politicalization of our law enforcement entities. Go look, do your own research. There's been plenty of independent, citizen journalists who are finding and busting all kinds of federal, state, and local level law enforcement entities who are facilitating illegal activities. They've got special areas in the airport. They're flying people at night. And if you try to ask so who the hell are you as cops, or is the person in charge of that entity? So I didn't even think about this, going back to the humanitarian side, what is that going to do to us as a culture? There's men and women, good men and women in law enforcement. There really are. I mean, I know there's a lot of shitbags, but there's a lot of good ones too. How is that weighing on their soul? Are we going to see these people, just leave in droves? I'm done with this. I can't work for, again, the mayor of New York. He's wearing a $700 tie, telling, each and every one of us how we've got to suck it up and we're going to have to pay more. He's wearing hey, how about instead of buying a $700 tie, you give your it's America. You're free to do it. You could give that money to, some, an NGO or something. But instead what we have is local, state, and federal law enforcement knowingly, again, and the whole, I was ordered to do it, I was just following orders. That doesn't cut it, boys and girls. That does not cut it. As men and women, as Americans, as human beings, you better be looking yourself in the mirror. And I challenge you, and if you're a law enforcement, you disagree, leave a damn comment. But this is going to end poorly if even we've already lost respect for journalism in America. We've the CDC. Does anybody we've already lost respect of so many of our entities, our organizations that used to have respect, and they were the part of the foundation, the bedrock of us as a society, and that's being chipped away. I'll sit there and save that for another episode, little tinfoil hat, but I think that's done intentionally. And if you're part of that entity, that organization, and you're knowingly going along with this and facilitating it, I've just got to simply ask, kind of rhetorical question. Are you guilty as well? I mean, I think both legally and morally, you're kind of guilty. And then now back to something Patrick just said, and I've got a purpose here. Bear with me, guys. This is going to segue into the national security side. But then, so for humanitarian issues, we should let people come in. Well, now there's going to be economic issues, just kind of bringing the argument up to where we are. And not just economic. Okay, what if they get in an accident? Well, what if one of them gets drunk and drives a car and kills a kid? That just happened in Texas, last week. It happens all the time. Or a guy rapes somebody or kills them. Well, what about those expenditures, those costs, both in the terms of lives lost that would not have been lost? You notice how the left never talks about that. Hey, but look, by bringing all these people in, we're increasing crime. Look at New York. Look at our major urban areas that are that have allowed this and fostered this. Look at how it's turning into a Mad Max scenario. We just had law enforcement officers get the living shit kicked out of them in New York the other day. They could have been killed. How that didn't result in the death of that officer, I have no idea. I mean, because they could have easily taken that officer's tools and killed them with it. But who's paying for that, boys and girls? Are the illegal immigrants who are committing these crimes paying for it? Have the people who are making the humanitarian arguments even thought this through? That goes into education, medical. Look at the citizens of Chicago talking about hey, there are food banks and everything to help us out, needy people. And now by bringing in these other people who skip to the front of the line, me, the actual citizen who pays taxes in this city and the state, now I don't get anything, or now it's even more difficult. So second and third order effects. Then I've got one last thing to say, and then, two last things. Then I'll bring it over to Patrick or Redbeard, whoever wants to start on the national security side. Okay. So then you look at that bill that the Senate wanted to pass, 5,000. So basically, it was a bill saying that we're going to let 5,000 people break our laws every day. What message does that send, right? So it's not even just that humanitarian and economic, it's also that psychological. And wouldn't that embolden terrorists and criminals? Like, you're going to say, and it wasn't even, and by the way, that 5,000 was people from Mexico, Central America, and South America. That 5,000 didn't, everybody from everywhere else in the world was excluded from that 5,000 a day limit. So it's just even madness on that level. And if you are a state or a federal law enforcement officer and the federal government says, hey, you're going to go down there and arrest the Texas Rangers and, law enforcement and Texas National Guard because are you going to do it? I mean, so again, that goes back into previous episodes about potential blue on blue. So we're creating a situation that whether you want to make a humanitarian or economic argument, you're not looking at the law enforcement and the real humanitarian argument. It was like, so what happens the moment two law enforcement entities, and to Kevin's point from before, law enforcement officers, federal or state or local, are arrested all the time for crimes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. But as I countered him then, but that's not the same thing as what we're talking about here. Those are actual criminal investigations being executed. These are two forces put into the same place with conflicting messages or conflicting directives or mission statements. So and I see Patrick smiling down there, and I'm just going to end it on this and as a segue, and I'll let these guys chime in where they want. Now, if you think about all those people, I'm just going to say this was my background. I really, I don't want to sound horrible, but look, when you study a craft, whether you're a professional, whatever it is, you want to find out if you're good at it. You want to be tested, right? You want to, do your job in the most demanding of circumstances. My previous occupation was in the agency. I was a ground branch officer. Think of like the OSS and, the Redbeards and stuff. Like, that's kind of who, if you want to, it's a bad analogy, but that's kind of it. I cannot help but look at what's going on in America right now on this border from a national security perspective. I don't want to be crass. I won't say a wet whatever, but like, oh my God, I would have. Do you know how many of our enemies have already taken advantage of it? Whether they intend to do something with it or not, that's to be determined. I don't have that crystal ball. But what I do know is me and the guys like me, we would have been chomping at the bit to take advantage of this situation in order to get in there and do our job, the job that we were trained to do. That's kind of where I'm just going to leave that as we segue into national security. So Patrick, Redbeard, I don't know if you guys want to kind of respond a little bit more on the Leo side, but let's take it into national security here for the on our way out. Patrick, you want to go first or Redbeard? Redbeard, you seem like you're chomping at the bit.
Yeah, I'll add a couple things here quick.
Okay.
You know, Mark, I've said it a lot. You know, from a very constitutional perspective, you know, we have sheriff departments that, you know, there is a certain expectation of them. And I think that, you know, having proper constitutionally guided, you know, peace officers and sheriffs and stuff like that is vitally important. And I just want to hit on something real quick, just on like the law enforcement side, which is, you know, it goes hand in hand with the realm of humanitarian, the humanitarian point, right? Because can you properly administer humanitarian aid to those who are seeking refuge or asylum without having a properly established form of safety and security? And then furthermore, before you get to those people, your primary directive, your authority is to first uphold the safety and security of your own people. So when you're neglecting to do either or, in many ways they are, you're not really providing the level of humanitarian aid that you think you are, and you're also neglecting employing your law enforcement individuals, or rather what should be peace officers, but in a proper capacity to actually do any good. Now, just on a final note, kind of going into the national security realm, and Mark and Patrick, I'm sure you guys have heard this, but I don't remember if it was Biden directly or his within his administration, but they wanted the Alaska National Guard to go confront Texas. And they're like, hey, why don't you go do, like, if there's, let's be honest here, okay? That presents a very real national security issue, because now you are making that force on force, that blue on blue, an ever more possible reality. And if we have internal strife like that, that weakens our ability to maintain our borders. It weakens our ability to maintain security, especially as it pertains to you know, our peace officers. And when that is weakened, then the people who cry about humanitarian support and aid, look, you can't have these things if you have internal strife that are creating security concerns, whether it's for the average American or for people looking for legitimate asylum and refuge. So you lose the humanitarian aspect of it anyway if you're starting to create internal strife. So I'm just going to leave it there, but I just wanted to point that out. Also, you're muted, Mark.
Hey, it's got to happen at least once every podcast.
Yes.
Mark, you're muted. Mark, you're muted. So, Patrick, I was trying to say, Patrick, you want to grab that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And those are really great points too. You know, I honestly think that, you know, law enforcement and national security go hand in hand. The problem is, especially now that we've got such an influx in the United States, to Mark's point, there are undoubtedly, you know, foreign enemies inside the United States right now that came into the country under the guise of, you know, seeking asylum or, you know, humanitarian crisis or whatever. And that's too easy. I mean, if somebody would have told us that when we were going into other countries that, oh, that's all you have to do, you don't even have to use a false name or anything else, they're not even going to know who you are. Okay, well, that's awesome. Then we'll just set up shop and go to work and start taking down your critical infrastructure and, you know, destabilizing your government. And then, yeah, we'll just replace them with somebody we like, which, you know, doesn't really sound too far-fetched nowadays. So, you know, problem on the law enforcement side in America, and this has always been the case, but, you know, quick little Google search, you know, there's, and it's probably not too far from accurate either, 17,985 separate law enforcement agencies in the United States. How many of those agencies do not share information? They don't have common platforms. You know, Homeland Security was set up to build, you know, to kind of bridge that gap, to set up fusion centers all across the nation. But everybody, I think this is human nature, tends to only focus on, hey, what's happening in my state, my area right here. And they're not looking at the national picture. There's small elements within DHS and other agencies that are supposed to facilitate that. But a lot of that stuff falls in the cracks. And just like anything else, it comes down to who is that person that's supposed to drive it. So personality dynamics are real. So if you get somebody who's introverted, or maybe they're just an ass and nobody wants to work with them, well, guess what? You know, the effectiveness of that fusion and that sharing of information, it goes down. Yeah, you know, and again, we're also talking about all these different agencies. They all had come from different, you know, political and economic, you know, situations that vary greatly. So there's that. So those are the people that are on the ground that would discover these threats, like, or come across them if they're educated to understand and recognize what it is they're seeing. I can't say with great faith that I think that that's the case. And throw into the mix now that law enforcement has been demonized, and, you know, let's defund them, and they're bad. What's the motivation, right? So this is all just rife for something bad happening. Now on the you know, the military and the intelligence side,
just before you go to the military, because I wrote it down as you were talking, internal strife.
Yeah.
That's totally insurgency, you know, warfare right there. So I just wanted to throw that in there as you're saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, take a look at what's going on too. You've got all these, you know, a handful of states, you know, back in Texas up saying, hey, if it comes to it, we'll send our people down there to help out. But the other states, no, we're not going to do that because, you know, we're blue states, or whatever the case, whatever the, you know, the governor's, you know, flavor is, right? So, our enemies see this, and, you know, if you look at this from their eyes, right, you know, you can just pick any one of them and say, hey, look, if I were going to attack the United States, how easy would it be? You know, like, let's start in Africa. How do I get from Africa, you know, to Central America and then up through Mexico into the United States? Now, once I'm there, where's my pocket of people that are going to, you know, provide, you know, what we call command and control? Where do we source? Where are we staying? How do we communicate? Where are we getting the you know, the things that we're going to use to attack critical infrastructure and cause, you know, chaos and mayhem throughout the United States? I don't think it's that hard with what we've you know, set up here. And if it happens, and I pray that it doesn't, but I think it's truly a matter of when, not if. What's the political, you know, fallback going to be? Oh, the Republicans caused this because they wouldn't pass a law. Like, oh, come on, man. This is, and then it's really going to truly come down to people. That's why, again, going back to the individual responsibility and accountability, folks, I mean, we cannot be tied to these things, right? We cannot be tied to these things. We have to be aware when we're out in public, because who knows what's floating out there. And there's nothing saying private citizens can't be the first people to see and report this stuff. Most of these things have a phone. So instead of, like, you know, taking a selfie or something, how about, like, recording that stuff and passing it on to law enforcement and the government? Say, hey, we just saw this, like, and this is where the location, time, and place where it happened, so that somebody can take action on it. So, and that's where, you know, everyday citizens, we've got to start putting ourselves in the position of, not mandated reporters, but like trained observers, and pass this stuff on. And you don't have to do a big block. Just be aware and capture the stuff and get it in the hands of, to law enforcement, so they know it.
And I just wanted to add in exactly what you just said at the end, when I was trying to interrupt you, Patrick. God, let me interrupt you, man. No, that's exactly it. It doesn't mean that you just have to be you are a citizen. This is your community. This is your state. This is your country. This is what you are a part of. You know, be open-minded, have an open eye, be that trained observer, as Patrick just said. That doesn't make you don't have to be a Karen. You don't have to be sitting there in your front yard writing down the license plate numbers if everybody drives by your house. But when something's out of place, because you know your community better than anyone else. Yeah, that should get some spidey sense. It doesn't mean that, again, when neither are we or any of us advocating, that doesn't mean you start like, trying to follow somebody or what. But to Patrick's point, because if you think there's some federal entity, state or federal or whatever, that's going to like, swoop in, right before, your door gets kicked in and terrorists take you over or somebody blows up this or does that. That's not what's going to happen. Right. So it really, and I really love where you come at it, Patrick, is, it is up to each of us. That's why we say you are the resistance. And this goes on so many levels. Again, we're trying to keep these podcasts, under 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours. It's never enough time. So hopefully for everyone who's watching or listening this, you take it to heart. And whether you have conversations with your friends, your family, go to other podcasts, we've already actually taught this as a class in one of our previous podcasts, because it was a class I used to teach, to what Patrick's point is. And it isn't incumbent upon all of us, because think about this. And I don't mean this as an insult to any law enforcement entity out there or organization, but when your city is rioting and burning itself down and your mayor says, just let them do it, what else are you inviting? I mean, again, it's second and third order effects. You've already just told a group of people that they can get away with breaking the law and nothing's going to happen to them. You've told the other law-abiding citizens, some of them are going to be pissed off, like, and to Jeremy's point, you're going to create insurgents out of that. They're going to be like, well, F you, I'm never going to help you guys again. And another group is going to say, well, maybe I can go join these guys because nothing's happened. So maybe I can start committing crimes. You're just facilitating negative upon negative upon negative. There's no positive outcome from that type of scenario when you're not upholding your own laws. And to Patrick's point, and I'll take a pause there. And you're opening yourself up for all kinds of incredibly horrible, very serious, life-threatening ramifications. And without going into too much detail, if Jeremy wants to allude to it, I mean, Patrick kind of heard a little bit about it last night. I'm not joking. I have seen some things over the last couple of weeks and read some articles and had conversations with great people like these two guys. And it's kind of made me, I've got this dots on the wall analogy, and I've kind of seen things a little bit differently recently. And I'm here to tell you, boys and girls, this border situation, whether it's for better or worse, it's going to put us in a position where we are going to have an incredibly difficult time digging our way out of this. And I just pray to God that it doesn't result in too many Americans being killed. It's already resulted in Americans being killed, both just, from a criminal perspective. And now as we kind of go in maybe a little deeper in the national security side, again, I guarantee it. I don't know. I'm not in the agency anymore. I don't have access to any TSSCI. I'm not looking at, SIGINT or any of this kind of stuff. But I just know, because this is exactly what I was trained to do. And, and the other countries, our enemies, they don't operate. They don't have the same legal framework that we have. It's a much different game for, the Russians and the Chinese and the Cubans and the North Koreans and the Iranians. Venezuela. Thank you very much. I mean, it's a long list. If you don't think they're here already in our country, and I'll get to this in a little bit more, but they are already here. Their equivalent of, special activities, actually, I don't think it's called, Patrick, I don't think it's called SAD anymore. I think it's got a new name, but special activities, ground branch, like those, they have their equivalents and they are here. And some of those countries are pretty damn good at it. Do your own research. The Cubans burnt us on a bunch of intel ops in the past. The North Koreans trained to kill you every friggin' day, So you can't just write them off as like, well, they don't have the same resources and tech that we do. They also, sometimes you make up for those resources and tech by numbers, perseverance, I was just going to say dedication, willpower. Yeah. Patrick, you want to grab that for a second and run with it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great, a great point. I mean, you take a look at modern warfare, you talk about the sniper and how they can, really rule an area for a commander and can drive both the movements of opposing forces and get into their psyche and shut down their operations. That's one guy. apply that to like, a few people that you just described inside the United States that are willing to do that. And if they do something coordinated, what is that going to do? I mean, look at the, I hate to even call them snipers, but the DC snipers back in the day.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the paralyzing effect that they had, right? And it was just, and the media is just an amplifier for that type of stuff. If this happens, which again, who knows what it's going to be, where it's going to be. There's only so much luck that goes into this law enforcement thing too. Something's going to fall between the cracks, and what's the country going to do? How are they going to respond to it? And more importantly, recover from it. How long is it going to take to come back? So that's why individual citizens can make a strategic difference by just being heads up and calling stuff out, because the assumption is, well, I think somebody else has got, don't assume, don't ever assume anything. Go through, do your due diligence, report whatever it is. If you're the cop on the street, if we've got law enforcement listening to this stuff, never underestimate what you could come across. You don't know. I mean, just like everyone's trained, like any particular traffic stop could be potentially with the last one of your life. You don't know. But then again, it could also be something where, you wrap up, a cell leader for some group that was going to, cause massive damage to, a large region in the United States. You just don't know. So people have to be engaged. Keep your heads up. Don't listen to the negative hype about law enforcement. Don't listen to the political stuff. Hey, engage, be proud of being American, but be proactive, engage.
Hey, I just got to throw this out there. I was just starting to write it down, but I'm just going to throw this out there now. If somebody thinks that Patrick is being, fear mongering or exaggerating, I'm just going to throw out some things. So we had a potential Chinese operative in the Feinstein in her circles. Wasserman Schultz had those Pakistani guys who fled the country, and you never heard anything about that again. Who, so I'm just talking about traditional spycraft, right? Traditional, think of honey traps, recruitments, double, turning people or getting hired. God, we've had this in the Navy, where we've had people who, were in, recruited into the Navy, hired, they're in the Navy, and now they're in, working in sensitive positions, and they're selling those secrets to China. I mean, this list is long. Swalwell with Fang, how, and I hate to say this, boys and girls. And look, this is straight up. If any of that would have happened to me, here, I'll give you a little insight. And Patrick, tell me if I'm about to say too much, right? Help me not get in trouble here, right? But I think it should go without saying, and this is probably public, open source information. Clearly, as an employee of the Central Intelligence Agency, I couldn't just have friendships and relations with anybody from any part of the world. Right. So figure out what I'm trying to say. There's definitely adversaries. There's threats. There's certain countries, it isn't just, we're not talking about the people. We're talking about the governments, right? And what they represent, that are specific targets. And you just can't go and marry somebody from that country. You can't have a relationship. You've got to report things. There's all kinds of, your life isn't really your life. If you go and meet somebody at a bar and have sex with them in a foreign country, you've got to actually report that shit. I mean, and if you don't, you're in trouble. So just think about it from that perspective is what I'm trying to get at, and look at it from the other side of the coin. We're talking about America, and we're talking about, the border issue and this mass, immigration, illegal immigration. Think of how many people who could now come across under a nom de guerre, right? A fake name, again, you don't even, because if I fly through, if I come in through Dulles or some other place, well, then I'm going to have to go through biometrics and customs and all that kind of stuff. It's going to make my job as an intelligence officer very difficult, right? To what Patrick kind of alluded to. You've got traveling names, there's different personas, nom de guerre, however you want to talk about it, right? I'm obviously dancing around this a little bit because I'm not 100% sure what I can say and cannot say, but it's a million times easier when you're an evil country, or if you are the enemy of the United States, and you don't have to operate within those same, and I think Jeremy will agree with this. Thank God we have these constitutional requirements and constraints, right? Because otherwise, who knows because it's probably already happening right now, where we have, entities within our government who are operating outside of the bounds and the purviews and their legal authorizations. I think everybody would kind of agree on that. But if you take it on the flip side, what I'm kind of driving at, the ability to get in and to penetrate and cause this type of disruptions, even from the traditional side, and turn people, recruit them. Again, why is Swalwell still even in Congress? He clearly was.
Yeah.
What's that?
No, I'm saying exactly. That's another thing that's disgusting. I mean,
Yeah.
if that happened to any human being in the intel community or any cleared position, you would instantly be taken out of there until the full investigation was complete to figure out, hey, what was your involvement? How deep did this person get? The counterintelligence interests, they're not going to let you go about your daily business until they're satisfied.
Exactly. And then from the CI perspective, so here's where we have. So this adds into the illegal immigration. I'm just adding to the national security side. So we had those guys out in the Senate who had, gay sex in that conference room. I don't give a shit if you're gay or you're lesbian. That's not the point I'm making here. Being gay or being lesbian, from the perspective of certain adversaries, is what would be called a vulnerability. And within the political, even within America to this day, that is, look, if you're gay and lesbian, again, leave a comment. But I lived in Chicago and went to grad school there, and I know Boys Town very well. The promiscuity and, and what that kind of culture in certain aspects can lead to. And now you're working in DC. Dude, the ability to turn you and set you up and put you into a compromising situation so I can take advantage of that as a foreign intel officer. I'm here to tell you, we don't operate that way. That I can say, well, I never operated that way. If there's elements in the agency that do it, I wasn't aware of it. And that goes against all of our authorizations. But even that right there, no one talked about that. That right there is an incredibly compromising situation. There's no legal charges. Okay. I don't understand how having sex, whether it's gay or heterosexual, in a government building after hours with people who weren't government employees, I don't know how that doesn't get you kicked out or get you arrested or something. So I don't know about that. But from an intelligence perspective, man, that's the kind of stuff I was looking for, because those are motivations and vulnerabilities. This is what intelligence officers strive to exploit. So that's one thing right there, right? So you just got to take a step back and say, if we're allowing this to happen, we're pushing this under the rug. We're not talking about, Swalwell and Fang. We're not talking about, Wasserman Schultz and, those Pakistanis who are working for. We're not talking about Feinstein and if we're not even serious about this, boys and girls, at the level where we should be. So down here on this migration, illegal or otherwise, you don't think our foreign adversaries aren't taking advantages from the intelligence perspective? I just got three things to say, and then I saw Chip just kind of chimed in, and that's awesome because I was hoping he could make it. I'm just going to say secret biolabs out in California. That's not made up. That's not tinfoil hat. Go do your own research. How did that happen? Well, because you're not controlling your borders and you're not looking at anything, and no one's a threat. And no money from China here. Direct action terrorism, right? So think of that as, a guy, yelling Allahu Akbar and then driving a dump truck down the promenade and running over a couple hundred people to, a guy with, weapons, shooting a bunch of people or pipe bombs, at Boston Marathon. Hard targets and infrastructure. And then before I bring Chip on, I'm just going to share one thing here real quickly. Hard targets and infrastructure. I'll put this. Yeah, I think here we go. So actually, I've talked about this in classes years ago. This isn't anything earth shattering. This isn't even anything necessarily new. Matter of fact, I think they'll actually even reference it here. Just give me a quick second here. I'm looking at the power grids. I might have to come back to this real quickly. I may have actually pulled up the wrong article. This is just a different one talking about our grids and dire warnings. But I'm just talking about direct action. So I'm going to talk as I'm looking for this because there was a quote in here. Yeah, here it is right here. All right, so I'll come over here, share this full screen now, and I'll go back over to the page itself, and I'll hopefully be able to highlight this right here. So you guys can read that for yourselves. This is old news, right? So this is what might happen if, think of, EMP, coronal mass ejection, again, maybe some natural events that CME would be, but EMP's man-made terrorism. when we're letting people come across our border, people who my argument is there's definitely people from foreign countries who are, that country's equivalent of, Ground Branch Special Activities Division, OSS, however you want to frame it, right? And this is what they're looking at right here. Think about this. This is an incredibly scary scenario. What's really scary is maybe there's people in our government who want this to happen. We'll put that aside. But look, Woolsey wasn't an idiot. You can say whatever you want about him, but realistically, just think about this. If we lost our grid, if power went out, how many people do you think make it through this winter? This winter's been very mild so far, but how many people do you think make it through the winter? How many people do you think survive even 72 hours after no more TikTok, Instagram, and credit cards and cash machines? You know what I'm saying, guys?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to bring Chip in here. And I didn't mean to sidetrack us there, but I mean, these are, when we talk about the border and national security, you've got to go into these other things, whether it's direct action, using a dump truck or a guy with a handgun or a machete or a long gun, all the way to people, with secret chem bio labs to the destruction of our infrastructure, right? Whether that's bridges, tunnels, just our buildings. Oh, that's never been happened. Oh, I'm sorry, 9/11, right? Or our critical infrastructure, such as our power grids and our power nodes and other key nodes like that. I just kind of wonder, and this is where I'm going to end it, and I'm going to bring Chip in, and I'm kind of talking a little bit more just to get him back up to speed. He was asking where we were, and this kind of like is summing it up. But I wonder how many people who are pushing for humanitarian-ish reasons, who aren't looking at the economic, the law enforcement, and the national security implications, how many of those people, just like with COVID, how many of those people are apologizing? Yeah, we knew the masks weren't going to work, but we still did it anyway, regardless of the second and third order effects. We knew doing this to children was going to have these deleterious effects that we're going to see 5 to 10 years, but we did it anyway. Even there's so many reports coming up about the CDC was, and media and politicians were hiding this information. So just think about that. That's just one singular event, Corona.
Yep.
When you're bringing in millions of people, Patrick, what is your guys' estimate? 11 million? Is that known, or is that including the ones we don't know about, the getaways, the unknowns? Is that
that's 11 million that we know since, as far as numbers go, from last summer to now.
So I'm not even
asking. That's conservative. So the number in reality is probably higher.
So without asking anyone to even make an estimate of how many of those 11 million are bad guys, whether it's drug cartels, that's your local, that's your local fentanyl crisis, the moped gangs running around and raping and robbing people, in the streets of your city, all of that kind of basic criminal activity, all the way into somebody was setting up a freaking hidden secret chem bio lab in California.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's the whole effing gambit. Chip, we got to bring it over to you, sir. We're running a little bit long tonight, but I'm so happy to see you come in. I did give you credit for how this whole conversation started. Welcome. Can you let everybody know a little bit about yourself? And then I think you tell me, I think you've heard quite a bit. We already went through the humanitarian, economic, and law enforcement. We're on the national security side, but I think we just need to turn the floor over to you and let you just speak. But please introduce yourself. It's been a while. It's been a minute, as they say, since you've been on the podcast. Can't hear you, sir. No, we're not hearing you, Chip. Still can't hear you. Nope. Your silence is deafening.
It shows muted now.
Oh, he might just be reconnecting. All right. So while
Mark,
Chip is
Patrick, I got to bounce, but I'll throw one more thing out there to end it. When we're talking about the national security side of things, when you hear all about the Chinese coming over here, something I think the average American needs to understand is when you think about China, you cannot think about them like you think about the United States or a Western nation, right? We think of like the military is completely separate from law enforcement, is separate from a university. university is separate from a private company, so on and so forth, because that's just the way we live. Problem is we tend to, use that same lens when we look at other countries. China is solely controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So everything, even if it's a private company, like, oh, we don't have anything to do with the government. Yeah, they do. They all do. They can't avoid it. So that's something to keep in mind. So when you have all these folks coming over here that are whatever they're claiming, why they're running from China, it would be very, very easy for them to take advantage of everything else with the cyber attacks, with their intel collection, the efforts ramping up. If it goes into a situation where they're working with, the Afghans that we brought over that were not really truly vetted, and then whatever criminal elements are here now too, like the Venezuelans, to orchestrate attacks all over the place. So that's what they're about. We're in a Cold War with China. Just be aware of that, and that's to me the most scary thing that is taking place with this. It's bad before, now it's like gone into hyperdrive.
All right, right on. Well, hey, so here's the deal. We might just be calling it audible. So Chip just texted me and he's got some technical issues. Yeah. So to this point, he just wrote inshallah. So, Redbeard, I know you got to bounce here in a little bit. Patrick, you got to bounce. We've gone a little bit long. Hey, Chip, if you're still watching or listening on the backside, we'll catch you next time, sir. Thanks for making that effort. Really appreciate it.
Mhm.
Again, part of this whole, like, how I approach this tonight had a lot to do with Chip. Redbeard, again, I just don't see there's any way we're not going to, somewhere in the next 30 to 45 days, we're going to have to revisit this subject, right?
We're going to have another conversation about this, because I feel like it's just one of those perpetual subjects that is constantly in that rear view mirror, where it creeps up into the passing lane and decides to try and pass us every so often.
Well, then with your permission, let's bring it down to Patrick. Patrick's got to bounce here in a couple minutes too, and I know you do. So why don't let's get Patrick with some closing gems.
Mhm.
I know I could rant about this all day long, and I'll just say this for everybody here. Go back. We actually did a couple episodes where some of the classes I used to train or teach when I first left the agency, we actually did. Did we do 2 of them, Redbeard? I think we did 2 different.
It was like two or three. It was a string of them.
Some of the stuff, just like and how not to be a victim, and like what's going to happen potentially in the first 72 hours, how you look at a crisis, and that was the intent here tonight. It's like you can't just look at the border and then just say, well, we have to do it because we're Americans and that's what we do. That's just in my humble opinion, that's a foolish perspective. You are totally missing the forest through the trees, right? And that's what we're trying to illustrate here tonight. And truth be told, I yet again don't think, we should have almost just done the whole episode on just the national security implications and be damned with the humanitarian and economic, because we all know that those are real issues that people don't want to talk about because they don't want to talk about real issues. But the issues that many people don't want to talk about, and Patrick, I'm setting you up, even within these organizations, if you've been in those occupations, whether you're a law enforcement officer or, a federal, whatever, Chip, former FBI, 1811, whatever your occupation is, what we're saying is true. There's even people within those organizations, when confronted with the objective hard facts, they don't want to admit it, and they want to ignore it, and they want to and just pretend, because for whatever reason, those people are more concerned about their, climbing the corporate ladder or their political aspirations or whatnot. So Patrick, I don't know if that's a good throwing up a softball for you here on your way out, or
I'll hit that one. It's just like anything else, right? You get you hear government bureaucracy. Well, these are people that when they're confronted with a situation where they know is clearly wrong, or there's some problem with the system that's utilized to address certain issues, they won't call it out because they don't want to be that guy who called something out and presented a problem, because they don't want to be known to the boss as, hey, this guy always talks about problems. But when you're, part of an agency that's rife with problems, and I would challenge pretty much any agency at this point with what's going on, especially in Homeland Security, but also numerous other federal law enforcement agencies. If you're not like trying to adapt and change to address these issues, you're behind the power curve, and I see a lot of that, and it's sad. So It's not, I don't just pray for my, law enforcement brothers and sisters on the streets and on the highways, but also on the federal side. Have the courage to stand up and do the right thing. What's right. You're not risking your career by, doing a whistleblower or at least addressing your issues to hire, to rectify. And let's say nothing happens. If there's a change of administration, change of leadership, and they come across this stuff, they'll say, well, this was pointed out. Why didn't somebody do something about it to fix it? So, or if there's something catastrophic that occurs because they didn't take your advice, you can be that guy that says, or gal that says, hey, I told you so. Have the courage to do the right thing. That's what the American taxpayer, expects from you. Live up to the expectation.
I think that's going to be a second Patrick banner for our banners that we have. Have the courage to do the right thing. Patrick. I mean, everybody's heard that before, but what a great closing statement right there, because these are real. This is real. What we're talking about. It's real from an economic perspective. It's real from the crime in your local community perspective, and it's real from a couple thousand or a shit ton of people. Go do that. Go pull up Woolsey and look at that. Matter of fact, I will post a link to that article, and then you can do your own research and find that what would the word I'm looking for here? It wasn't really an intel paper, but it was an assessment, not really a red cell either, but here's a bunch of smart people working in this industry talking about what would happen if the grid goes down. And now if you saw that, they came up with two different scenarios. And one of the scenarios, 90% of Americans would be dead within the first year if we lose our power grid. That's real, right? These are, intelligent individuals, cold and calculating, leaving emotion aside and looking at what would be the real world ramifications if this happened to us. Well, we're getting closer to that becoming a reality. I'm sure everybody's heard the thing, terrorists only have to get lucky once. We have to get lucky, law enforcement, intel agencies. We have to get lucky every time. We miss one event. They get lucky and we miss that one event. That could result in horrendous casualties, and it could have horrendous ramifications. And if you're talking, that's just talking like, an international terrorist organization. What if it's a nation state? What if it's warfare? What are the ramifications?
Hey, Mark, I got to get ready to go. But I put down here, and I think that our listeners could do this, because this is something it's unclassified. It's put out every year. So the Office of the Director of National Intelligence every year publishes an unclassified version of their worldwide threat assessment. You can download it right now and take a look and see, hey, here's what the unclassified side of what the United States government's willing to talk about as far as threats go from all these different countries and nationalities and problem sets. That's a great way to educate yourself on this stuff and see, and it's pretty current. So pull up the one from last year, and I think March is around the time frame when they come up with a new one. So pull that up.
Before you go, and I'm not rebutting what you said. You're absolutely right. It's a great source of information. So is the CIA. There's a couple different outlets that can provide you that. But I do just want to throw out there, and Patrick, I know you'll agree with me. So again, I'm not arguing with you, but a lot of that can be political because I teach a class on terrorism at least once, maybe twice a year to some law enforcement. And the last time I taught it, that was when you had, Homeland and everybody else saying that the biggest threat to the homeland, to America, was, former military white Christians.
Domestic violent extremists. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. AGVE and all the other weird little bullshit acronyms. Yeah. I see you nodding, So just take it with a grain of salt though. I mean, but it's still good knowledge and it's a good resource, but just remember that, some of these organizations now more than ever are becoming politicized. And, if you used to be a veteran and if you believe in Christ and you're a parent and you go to your school board and say you don't want your kids being taught, like shown sexually explicit materials, that's not a joke either. That actually happened. They were trying to label you as a domestic terrorist. So just be careful with what you're reading and take it, and just remember, like it's being written by government, bureaucrats who might have their own agenda. That's all I'm saying.
True statement.
All right. Patrick, as always, thank you so very much, sir.
Thanks, guys.
Redbeard's going to take us on the outro. The outro always like puts a smile on my face and kind of wakes me up. You want to hang on for the outro?
I'll hang on. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Redbeard, final thoughts and outro, sir.
So I'm just going to leave with a quote by James Madison. It's a banger, and it ruffles a lot of feathers, especially the hardline statists. But he had a quote, and you can apply this to literally every facet of our government operations. But he said, the means of defense against foreign danger have always been the instruments of tyranny at home. I find it fairly shocking when you think about what his statement was there, and how it seems that we've become so obsessed with the idea of targeting the average American as it pertains to the utilization of the Patriot Act, which, I mean, let's be honest, that was whether people want to say it was the intent or not, I firmly believe it was always a nefarious thing. But it's weird how they're more obsessed with trying to classify Catholics and concerned parents and, you know, people who have deeply held values in this country than they are trying to address like any threats. And I'll be honest with you, like, I'm not even advocating for the existence of basically almost all of these federal agencies. But the thing of it is like, look, we know that this was going to happen from a guy who existed over 200 years ago. And people say like, oh, these people can't see in the future. Like, no, they derived this because they had similar things like this in yay old Britain, and they understood how lawless kings and monarchs and oligarchs can become. And they knew that this was going to happen regardless of the technology, regardless of who was in government. And so, look, like, in the end of the day, it should also raise questions. If this is a genuine concern, why are they wasting taxpayer money on us, on trying to surveil us and assail us and tell us how criminal we are when we have threats at the border and when we have so many other things? Because ultimately their assessment would find themselves complicit in many of the crimes and wages of sin that they want to accuse us of. So I'm just going to leave it at that for my final comment there, and then I can take us out.
Way to open up a can of frickin' worms as the last comment, you son of a gun. Even Patrick knows it. Patrick's smiling, laughing too. He knows. I think we were both feeling it. I'm like, is he really going down this mother effer? Come on, man. All right, take us on out there, Redbeard.
All right, so even though I just opened a big pile of garbage there, look, the flame of liberty shall not and will not ever be extinguished so long as there are good people that are willing to support and defend it. And that means especially against these tyrannical means of defense that get turned on us, because it takes each and every single one of you to be aware. Like Patrick has always said, you have to be vigilant of what's going on. And that's not just from foreign threats or potentially domestic threats. It's identifying treasonous, tyrannical government that wants to make you a subject, that wants you to comply to their will and not the will of the people that they're supposed to comply to. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Stay free, stay safe, and have a great rest of your week.
You made a twist on your outro, and that was pretty spicy. I'm not going to lie. I liked it. Patrick, as always, thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thanks, brother.
Hey, I'll talk to you offline. We want to have you on as to talk a little bit more about the resiliency and the training side, but we'll have you on as just a guest in the future. But thanks you to Patrick for taking the time. Thanks to Chip. I know you're not in the ready room anymore, but you'll watch this. We'll get Chip on. Again, he was working late. He tried at the end and had a technical issue. Thank you for everybody who watched and leave. Again, seriously, leave us a comment, give a suggestion, join on the live streams. We really appreciate it. But more importantly, and not to take anything away from Redbeard, but there's no way you're doing this by yourself, boys and girls.
No,
you gotta, you know what I'm saying? So,
and get involved. God dang it.
Yep. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. But just under 2 hours. Thank you, everybody. God bless America. We really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, whether you watch or listen to it. And we'll see you either on the next live stream or on episode 47. All right, everybody, be safe. Thank you much.
Cheers.
Woo!